All right, so we are going live. Hello, welcome to our SEEP webinar around communications. I'm not sure of the official title, but it's basically like what's next, because we haven't dealt with enough change already. We're going to deal with more change. I'm Lisa Brown, and I am the Director of Digital Ministry for Membership Vision. I am also on the SEEP Conference Planning Board, which will be a different animal, I'm sure, this year as we're all staring down, digital choices. And I'm also on the standing committee of the Diocese of Pittsburgh. So a lot of questions that we've really been addressing is what does come next? What does a world look like that is a both and? We were very good at doing in-person gathered worship. Then we all turned on a dime and have just done a phenomenal job of leaping and rushing boldly into the digital space. But now we're moving into a really uncertain time. And I've noticed that the conversation around it just seems to change every 15 minutes. And the conversation that we're really hearing a lot of now is people are questioning, as different states and localities begin to open up again, what does that mean for churches? What does that look like for us? We can do in-person worship, we can do digital worship. What happens if we have to do both? Should we do both? So that's really what we're talking about today. And we want to talk about it from a big standpoint, but we also hope to give you all a lot of really kind of practical tips to help frame the conversation in your context. There are no answers, but if we can help you ask the right questions, hopefully that'll be good. And I'm going to say one of our additional panelists will be joining us momentarily, so he'll ping on in. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves. And let's see, I'll ask Jeremy to go first and then and touch on the rest of our panelists. So Jeremy, I guess what I should ask is, not just an introduction, I'm sorry. I'd love if you addressed in your introduction also, like, what do you feel are like the big themes right now that you're feeling a need to communicate? And what are some of the logistics that you're grappling with? If you could kind of work those in, that would also be helpful.
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, thanks, Lisa. Thanks to the panel that's here, to SEEP, for letting us have this conversation. My name is Jeremy Tackett. I'm the Senior Manager for Creative Services and Digital Evangelist for the presiding bishop here in the Episcopal Church. And so I cover a really broad range. My job is very different than a lot of the other folks that are on the panel that work in local parishes. But what we sort of hope to do, especially right now in this time, is sort of be support where we can, offer tools where we can to parishes, to organizations that are doing that frontline work of keeping the church going in whatever way that is. For us right now, that means trying to take the pulse of what's happening in the church and have that same kind of conversation around what does it look like. Lisa, like you said, we're doing digital really well. Lots and lots of churches in lots of contexts are doing things from Zoom to full-blown web video productions. But what does it look like as we transition into a new normal? We're not going away from digital for, I hope ever. I want us to keep digital. I've been preaching digital literally as an evangelist for it for years now. And I want to figure out in new ways, how do we integrate this? How do we take the best ideas that are out there and the biggest questions that are out there and replicate the good and answer some of the questions for the trouble? And we can talk plenty about how we're doing that.
I love an optimistic take on that. All right, so now I'm going to call on Lori. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, thanks, Lisa. Hi, I'm Lori Blewett. I am the Director of Communications at St. David's in downtown Austin, Texas. And Joe actually reminded me that my office at St. David's used to be the SEEP office. So that's a good tidbit to know. And right now, as you mentioned, Lisa, a lot of localities are starting to open up, and one of our main communications is we are still holding online worship. And we've also decided to continue formation online through the summer. So those are our main things right now, and to let everyone know that they can stay connected with us through our Facebook and our email newsletter, and to update their information so that when there are changes, as we thoughtfully and very carefully decide to make decisions, that they have the information as we get them. And yeah, and then for online worship, we know it's here to stay. So do we have the right equipment? Do we have the right staffing? What does that look like as we do this kind of hybrid in-person, online? And is our website optimized for that experience and things like that? So that's what we're working on right now.
Cool. Definitely we'll be talking more about that. I'll invite Marissa to chime on in.
Thanks, Lisa. And my thanks to SEEP as well for this important conversation. My name is Marissa Rohrbach. I'm the rector of St. Matthew's in Wilton, which is a parish in the Episcopal Church in Connecticut. I also have the privilege of being the chair of the commission, at least for the moment. So it's a privilege to serve in that way and in other ways around the diocese. Lisa, you asked in terms of themes, themes for communication and then logistics. And I think for me, in terms of themes, the two things that we're really trying to communicate most often are about connection and about hope. It's important to us in terms of the congregation that they remember that they are connected to something much larger, to a community that's trying to figure out how to care for each other, and obviously to the larger body of Christ. And also that they're sort of woven together into the story of God, right? And that leads us into the part about hope and the fact that we are resurrection people. And even though we're living in a time of isolation and pandemic, we believe in hope and we believe in new life. And so all of our programming and our worship and every decision that we're trying to make sort of weaves back into those two themes. And so logistically, that means that we need to chart a course that is both safe and faithful. And, as you've heard from the other panelists so far, I think that includes continuing a lot of our virtual presence and really sort of being very careful about what might be in person a little down the road.
I love that. And I'm a happy crier, and that made me choke up. One of the things that I do in my work is that I say to people, if I help anybody move from an informational understanding of the digital space to a relational one, then I've done my job. And so, and I think in the digital space, we have to be much more intentionally relational. So when we think about, when we gather at church, all the chit chat as you're sliding into the pews, and musicians, I'm sorry, I know you're playing the introduction and we're all chatting, or the chit chatting in the parking lot, or chit chatting as you're walking into the vestry meeting. That doesn't happen in the digital space. We jump on these Zoom calls, we jump into worship, and we get right down to business. So one of the things that I've certainly been advising people is making space for those relational connections. And sometimes that's just a check-in with everybody else. I want to see Jeremy's dog in the background. I want to hear how people's kids are doing and, what's going on in your context. So I think building that intentional time for relational chit-chat is super important. Somebody just asked if this webinar is open only to Episcopal communicators. No, bring on everybody. Share that link. And it will be on the SEEP website afterwards, so people can't watch it today. We are waiting on one more panelist, Bishop-elect Deon Johnson, who will be joining us in a minute. He was wrapping up. He's jumping from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, as we all do these days. And I want to talk a little bit, and so we'll introduce him when he gets here. I want to talk a little bit about audience. I had a great conversation with a priest, Father John Anderson in Danville, Virginia. Shout out to Father John. And he said an analogy that he has been using as we move into this weird hybrid, where we may have some gathered and we may have some online. He said it's almost like a late night talk show, which kind of threw me for a minute. And he said, the late night talk show, they play to a digital audience, except for those times where they very intentionally go into the studio audience. And whether you agree or disagree, I thought it was an interesting analogy. And I want to think a little bit about audiences. Prior to this, if we were live streaming, that was kind of secondary. The tripod was in the back of the church. If somebody kicked it over by mistake, oh well, we don't have live streaming this week. Now we've leaped into all live streaming, the camera and all that, no one's there to trip over the wires. So we can run the wires everywhere. We can have the camera on a stack of hymnals right in front of the altar. What are we going to do when we have to do both? Any ideas really about how you're going to do that? Is it live stream? Is it pre-recorded? What are our staffing needs? Those kind of questions. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Sure. So, I think we're all in such a, everything still changes almost every day, it seems. So I think, at least for us, we are still not quite ready to make any concrete decisions about that. But I suspect that for us and for most people, this is going to be a little bit of a hybrid. For us, I think we'll continue probably to have our main service virtual as it is, in a Zoom room with, somewhere between 15 and 30 people, and we live stream that, and the parish watches it all together at the same time. And that means probably that in-person things are going to be much smaller, right? And hopefully we're not tripping over the wires in the sanctuary, because I don't know that streaming an in-person worship gathering of 5 to 10 people, all of us with our face masks, is going to be particularly satisfying or comforting. Certainly it'll have some kind of comfort and satisfaction to us who are there, who get to see each other. But in terms of watching that online, I'm not sure that that's going to be a particularly comforting or enriching way to worship.
Anybody else want to chime in on that, maybe what you're thinking?
Yeah, I would add to that some of the conversations that I'm in, and I get this unique, interesting ability to look into a lot of different parishes that are doing this different ways and their different perspectives on it. But one of the most interesting things that I heard is we want to move from digital observation of worship to digital worship. And what does that look like? Because really what Marissa's talking about is what even we at the church-wide level had used live stream for. We would bring a team and we would live stream a revival, but there's really not a lot of engagement with the folks watching online. We invited you to take a look into the room, but really what we were focusing on was in the room. And as we did those, we began to see that really having someone on the team whose job was to be our digital engagement person, and that's in Facebook comments, things like the local parish that I worship with here in Philadelphia. You guys didn't think it was Philadelphia from the accent, did you? But here in Philadelphia, we make sure that we've got somebody who is posting the parts of the BCP that the service is in, that the morning prayer is in. When there are hymns, we let folks know what the hymns are. One of the things that I always find very interesting is when we get to the peace in a typical pre-COVID service and all the people in the room are shaking hands, somebody online says, "Peace be with you," and 50 people say, "And also with you, and also with you." And it's a reminder that these are folks that didn't just come because they want to watch a TV show. This is an act of worship, and they are hoping to engage in some ways. So I don't have any answer for how we do that, except to say I will give a shout out to Diocese of Northern Michigan, because they have done some incredible work with creating digital experiences. If you get a chance to check out what they're doing sort of diocese-wide as the digital worship offering in this time, it's very cool stuff that they're making happen. And lots of churches are doing it without lots of resources. They're collecting videos that folks do on their phones of reading the different parts of the service and playing on a piano in somebody's house. But we really need to begin to, or continue to think about, how do we make this digital audience part of the congregation, move them from audience to congregation, and what does it look like to do that in real meaningful ways?
And, to Lisa's point about sort of sliding into the pew and that conversation that you would normally have, I think there's an invitation here to reimagine the roles that people would have on Sunday morning, right? You'd have greeters and you'd have ushers, and how do they interact on Facebook? How do they interact in other sort of venues of social media?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, just to add on to what Marissa said is, we're looking at our parish, how are newcomers feeling when other parishioners are saying hello, and to really include them in that experience. And that goes to an actual worship experience, digital worship experience, and to be thoughtful about how those interactions could be perceived, and to help people feel welcome, whether they're, there for the first time or a longtime parishioner. And we're intentional even during our announcements to welcome people and to explain, here where you can find the bulletin and the order of service and things like that, just to help people with that, to make it easier for them.
You guys are touching on a lot of great points. I keep taking notes here of things I want to circle back to. And it is kind of funny because, so I always sit in the balcony in my church, and I confess to being one of those late arrivals. And I'm seeing that online, I'm totally busted when I shop, because people are like, oh, Lisa's here. The little thing scrolls by. But in talking about that interactivity, it also reminded me, and one of you said something about, there's opportunity for other people to get involved. One thing that I have seen that I'm just really delighted about is the increase of involvement of lay ministry and the prominence of lay ministry, and really expanding the ways, because the other kind of side of this coin that I want to get us to is talking about resources, and how we all know as the church communicator, this may not be sustainable, especially if we go back to some gathered, some digital. We can't do it all. And so I think the opportunity for lay ministry here and to really bring more people into ministry is huge, and exploring roles. So in no particular order, a couple of things you touched on. Lori mentioned the opportunities for evangelism. So I would love to hear if any of you have any particular stories of evangelism, where this is that you've seen recently of evangelism in the digital space, or if you have any particular thoughts on the reallocation of resources, whether they are people resources, or quite frankly, as we begin to look at budgetary resources, what this means. Everybody says, I didn't go to seminary to be the IT guy. Now we're all the IT guy, so do we need to hire an IT guy or now? Go for it. Thoughts?
Well, I can start with resources. So yes, the communications budget is being reallocated in different ways than I had planned from the beginning of the year, but that's okay. But since we know that online worship is here, do I have the right equipment? And right now we have 3 iPads that are on tripods that would be in people's way, right? If they were worshiping in person. So we're looking at some other equipment. Jeremy had mentioned the Mevo setup, where you could get a great bang for the buck with one camera. And so we knew that we wanted to be able to get different camera angles. And so we've looked at that. And it's also a smaller profile. So that is something that we're looking at. Right now we're using Switcher Studio, but it's very limited to iOS devices, so we know that we can't get broadcast quality images and video. So looking down the line, we knew that we needed to invest in some other equipment. And also just looking at staffing, right? We've got a part-time AV team member who does all of the recording, and myself, or another part-time team member does the remote direction, right, to make sure that we've got all the angles. And so what does that look like going forward? But then the reality of it is, what happens if any one of us needs to quarantine for a couple weeks? Just making sure that we have backup plans and everyone knows how to actually produce the online service for each week. So that's been something to think about. And our leadership has looked at, do we need to bring on additional staff, but beginning conversations. So definitely looking at that.
And I'll just chime in. I know a lot of communications folks are just doing amazing work right now from home. Hopefully I didn't just freeze there. And one thing I would say, I know people are trying to do stuff with equipment that is substandard. I hope and encourage all of you to advocate for yourselves. If you need a better laptop, or if you need more power, or if you need whatever, please ask for it. And I hope that your vestries will honor those requests, because I think part of this, and Laura, you said something in there about the quality of recording. Somewhere in this conversation, I do want to talk about expectations. I think many of us as communicators sometimes find ourselves betwixt and between. There may be pressure, well-meaning, and we know that, from parishioners who have helpful suggestions. And this used to be, the edits to the bulletin that you'd find on your desk on Monday morning. So now it's video production suggestions. And I think about a lot of our communicators who maybe do not worship in the parish that they serve. So it may have been that their Sunday was not a day for them to be there. Well, now we really need somebody on site if we're going to be producing any sort of digital content. We're going to need somebody there. So again, that speaks to that staffing. They need to shift staffing priorities and allocations around a little bit. And then back to managing expectations, the other half of the sandwich can be, I also know communicators who are being asked to pull stuff together and not necessarily letting people know just how much time that takes. So that servant update that's coming in at the last minute, and you've now got to play with it in iMovie for 3 hours, and it takes 3 hours to update. So again, I would ask all of you, how do we manage expectations, especially as we're all making this up as we go along?
Well, I think one of the things that it's important that we start with is the question of why we're doing what we're doing. Really having the conversation out of that place. And that's one of those things that you want to get your team, whether if you're a communicator, your communications team, your vestry, your leadership, your rector, if you are a rector, you want to be asking these questions. What's the end goal? Is it that we want to create the same $1 million broadcast as the mega church down the street, or a TBN program, or are we trying to use this as a tool to invite folks into the life and work of the church? Because I think doing some of that and making some of that clear can take some of the expectations and pressure off to have a multi-camera switched, incredible film experience, or it may clarify that is what you want to do, and this is a ministry that you want to reach out and you want to get to that level, and then you're able to clearly articulate that and ask the questions to the folks. I think it's a mix of an evangelism conversation and a stewardship conversation. I love to invite folks who think that every church should do the multi-camera, have a full-time production team to, up those pledges, man. We would love you to let them know what it takes to do this kind of stuff. Be very transparent about that. We just did a piece with the Living Church about the virtual choir that we put together. And one of the things I heard from communicators was they loved actually that we wrote out that this took a lot of people, a lot of time, and a lot of money to pull off because folks see the end product. I was in a conversation earlier where someone said, this is like magic. And I said, it's exactly like magic. The audience thinks that a trick happened and the folks on stage spent years putting it together. And so to be open about the whole process and explain what goes into this, that a video that comes out on Sunday is not something that was produced on Sunday. But just having that be part of the conversation, I think really can help with the expectations game.
If I can just add on to that for a second. The magic of our worship when we are in person is that God shows up, and not everything is always perfect, at least not anywhere near me. I don't know about you, but every once in a while, someone does something you don't expect, or God shows up and something changes. And so I think there's a conversation to be had here that is about the fact that this worship is not going to be perfect production either. It's still worship, to Jeremy's point. So, it's about what you're looking for, I think. And for us, that's about connection and how many people are involved and how many voices we see. And does that feel like church rather than, some kind of perfect video that took, everyone 8 hours to do and they posted it at 3 a.m.
And I have to say, to speak to that, and then I see Laurie just unmuted, so I'll switch over to her. One of my favorite moments in online worship My rector's 13-year-old son runs the iPad. And at one point in time, he accidentally hit the thing that reverses the camera. And for a split second, you saw his horrified face, and then it switched back around. And that little bit of humanity, I love that. We're not producing, we're not putting on a Broadway production or a Hollywood blockbuster. We are gathering as a community to worship. So I really thank you, Marissa, for calling us back to that. Laura, you had something to chime in there.
Yeah, two things. One is we're starting to have at the parish level, what do we want this worship to look like? And what do we want out of that experience? And then from there, we're also working on a survey to our parishioners to get their expectations, right? When would they feel comfortable coming back to church? What level of technology are they comfortable with? What would they like that they're not getting right now, if they haven't already let us know? And I think that's an important part of the piece, is to hear from them what do they want out of this digital worship experience. I think we've gotten over the hump of, okay, here's a service. Now, if we've got a little bit of time, what is it that we can do to improve on that experience?
Yeah, I just in the past couple of days, I've seen a number of people on Episcopal communicators asking about, does anybody have a survey? Does anybody have a survey? So clearly, a lot of us are asking that question. And I think another big one is going to be, and this really isn't necessarily for us as communicators to settle on, but one thing that I've been thinking a lot about, that there seems to be a lot of conversation around, has been how we handle the Eucharist in digital worship, which is going to change presumably if we have some people gathered and some people digital. And how do we not have two classes of worship? And there's going to be a lot of questions. And the other thing, I've seen, and this is kind of a little thing, but what do we do with our bulletins? I mean, we're saving money, we're not printing, we're saving, copier. I had a dream the other night, I was unjamming a copier. I don't even know what that means. So we're saving money there, but thinking about how do we get people their bulletins and what's the best way to do that? So I don't know, any things like that as we're going forward, you're beginning to think about, and what are the questions that you're like, okay, what are we going to do about this, or singing, or whatever? Go.
Well, not specifically about bulletins, but people are developing habits now, right? And will those continue in person? If they're used to seeing the bulletin on their device, will they bring their device to church? So we're just thinking about what are some of those habits, and what are the ones that we want them to continue. One of the habits is they look for their Friday e-newsletter. That's great. They're always getting the information. So just thinking about some of those habits, which some new ones that they've developed, and maybe some old ones that we don't need them to have anymore.
One of the things that I would add in, and I've seen a little of this as I'm glancing over to the comments on my other screen, a couple of cautions to this whole conversation, and the word digital is in my title, but one, it's never going to be all digital. It's not going to be all online. And the other is that we can't simply equate church with worship. Sunday morning is a big part of what we do. But there's a lot more to the life of the church. And so I want to make sure that we think about beyond the Sunday look like, how do we stay connected, as Marissa said, in all of this. I wanted to quickly address one of the questions that we get a lot is, how do we get those folks that aren't going to Zoom in or aren't going to watch on Facebook Live, that don't have Facebook, how do they stay part of this? And it's a question we don't have a perfect answer to, but two things that I would say is, one, Zoom is a great platform for having a call-in feature so folks can listen along and be part of the conversation there. And also, I'll leave it to you to Google to get the details, but there are a number of Facebook options now that include a call-in to hear a Facebook Live. It's something that they're rolling out on pages. I don't have a ton of the detail. I know that our pages that we run as the Episcopal Church do have the option when we're setting up a live video in their producer. I'm not going to get in the weeds, but in the setup, there's an option to turn on the call-in feature. So there are some companies doing some of this, but on behalf of the church-wide level, we are thinking about how do we do this beyond just hitting Facebook Live and saying we're doing church online. There are a lot of folks that aren't included in that. And it's absolutely part of our thinking to figure out how we keep them connected in this as well.
So I'm going to jump in here and welcome Bishop-elect Deon Johnson, who is just joining us now. And I will invite him to introduce himself. And Deon, one of the things that we all were kind of addressing by way of introduction is really asking, and we've been talking about some of the big themes that are going on right now in our respective contexts, and what are some of the logistical and practical issues that you're grappling with. You know, and especially I know you are someone who is coming from parish ministry and moving into diocesan ministry. So there's also a part of this question that I'll address specifically to you. What does it mean to be in a new role as all this is happening? I think that's an interesting, there's opportunity and challenge, I'm sure.
I don't know what you're talking about. What challenge? Well, I'm Deon Johnson. I apologize for being late. I was getting done with our weekly clergy check-in and then had to do a little bit of homeschooling with my 8-year-old. So it's a little bit of everything today. And so context-wise, I, a couple months ago, was still in the parish up until February 9th. And so we made a transition from Michigan to St. Louis area to be the 11th bishop of the Diocese of Missouri. It's still kind of, and so my context now is very different. For the last 16 years of my ministry, I've had to think about, you know, liturgy and Sunday morning and gathering and all this stuff. And now the challenge is to think much wider than that for a whole diocese that spans multiple counties and figure out how do we adapt to the current reality and then plan for what comes next. And the thinking that I've had is we all know our individual context a lot better than one person. And so we've given pretty general guidelines of these are some of the things to consider in how you're going to regather, because each county here is different. And each county health people are doing different things. And so, and each context is different because we are a mixture of rural and urban and suburban and everything in between. And we have a variation in geography as well. So what may work in one place may not work in another. And so a lot of the planning is going to happen on the local level, rather than, you know, a top-down, here's a directive that says this is how you're going to do it. So that's been part of my learning, and part of the challenge in this is figuring out that, you know, context really does matter.
Thank you, and that's absolutely true. Sorry, and I know I just hear someone laughing in the background, which made a thought jump out of my head as it happens. Oh, I know where I was going with this. Thinking at the diocesan level and asking parish level folks, we've all seen that the thing that everybody really craves right now is to see their people. They want to see their clergy, even if it's imperfect and the live stream goes out halfway. Somebody asked, what's wrong with live streaming from the church building? If you can do it, great. But, you know, some people have had issues with live streaming where it's interrupted because they're in big old buildings made of stone and the Wi-Fi is lousy. And some people are not able to leave their homes depending on what the restrictions are where they are. But circling back. So people want to see their people. They want to see their clergy. They want to see each other. So it creates a question of sustainability because there's going to be a lot of energy. What are the things that either a diocese can do to support their individual parishes, as well as leaving them the freedom to kind of make their own decisions? We also don't want them to, you know, the freedom to drown. You know, how can we support them? And also, how can we as communicators and fellow members of the body of Christ support one another where have you seen really good collaborations that would be a model for all of us to maybe espouse?
Well, the risk of burnout is real. Let's start there. I suspect that for the first few weeks that we were out of our buildings, it was all novel, and the adrenaline was going. Let's get something out, and there was excitement around that, and a morning and an evening broadcast for morning prayer and evening prayer in Compline, and folks began to expect that, and by week 6, it's kind of like, I have to do another morning prayer or another Compline. And so recognizing that burnout with this stuff is real, because we don't really know when this is going to come to an end. And so I think part of what I've seen happen is allowing for lay folks to really take up leadership. There's nothing that says your priest has to be the person who's leading morning prayer on Facebook Live. Your priest does not have to be the one who does morning prayer, noonday prayer, evening prayer, and Compline, along with getting on Zoom, taking care of children, making sure that they're safe, and grocery shopping. That's too much. And so I think some of the best practices is recognizing that we don't have to do it all by ourselves. Empowering other people to do things for us is really helpful. The Diocese of Missouri did an Easter service that we encouraged the entire diocese to join us in one location for that service. And I think that worked out really well. I think we had over 1,000-ish people who showed up that morning. Might be a little less than 1,000, but we had a pretty significant group showing up. And I think that allowed us to really feel like we're all one diocese doing this at the same time and doing it together. And so I think any time that we can collaborate and show, that we're doing this together is really helpful. My communications person pulled together communicators from across our diocese for a webinar just to talk about, well, what do we need and how can we help each other? I thought that was absolutely amazing. And I think that we probably as a church are going to need to figure out how to do that. I mean, some of the offerings from the National Cathedral has been amazing because people were able to see something familiar. It may not be their clergy, but here are all Episcopalians from all walks of life tuning into one service and worshiping together. How great is that?
I think that's really been, it's really been an opportunity for us to feel like we are part of a greater body, which I think is wonderful. And things like the collaboration, the Easter hymn, that Jeremy mentioned earlier, really have been phenomenal. And I want to ask specific Lori and Melissa, Lori and Marissa, I talk too fast. At the parish level, have you been able to engage in any collaborative practices, or is there anything that you're saying in that regard?
Yes, we've had our evening prayer. Once we have our lay leaders leading that, and that's been really helpful. And also our Compline on Sundays, we do that, and so that's been really helpful to encourage them. And even with our recordings, we had been live streaming and including recordings from our lay readers, and a lot of our ministers are wanting to participate and wanting to help. And the more that we can do that, seeing other additional familiar faces has been really helpful. And you can see in the comments that people appreciate that.
Let's see, so somebody was asking if evening prayer is through Facebook Live. I know some people are doing evening prayer through Facebook Live. Are you guys? Is that what you're using?
Ours is on Zoom.
Okay. And I know that that's something that a lot of people are really trying to strike a balance with. And sometimes it does become a both and. Zoom is great because it allows an interactivity. So again, you get that people connection and people who know each other, but it's not as powerful as an evangelistic tool. Because you do have to have the password. And for many security reasons, we don't want to publish our passwords. You know, that has to be one of those where subscribe to the newsletter, email the church office, that's how you get the password. So I know some of the advice that we're giving a lot of churches is to use Zoom as a feed to either Facebook Live or to YouTube or a YouTube playlist, more public facing media to be used as an evangelistic opportunity, because you can put that safely on the website. So people who are watching on your website don't have that interactivity where they're, you know, and like I said, it's like whispering in church. We're kind of messaging each other, you know, as the service is going on. So they don't have that, but they still have the opportunity to experience worship. You know, and anecdotally, I have heard, and I'm hoping all you can provide some additional examples where we are seeing people attend digital worship that have never been inside one of our churches. I know a priest in North Carolina had said that he got a message on the website from somebody saying, hey, I watched your service, and he went and dropped off a prayer book at our house. And, you know, so there was opportunity there. So I want to ask you if any of you are seeing that and what you think the possibilities really are for digital evangelism that are represented by all this.
Lisa, I think there's a lot of opportunities. You know, in terms of the piece of a Zoom room that's locked that then you stream, like you were just talking about, I think there's a ton of opportunities for collaboration and evangelism there. We've been doing for the last couple of weeks a Compline service with Christ Church Cathedral in Montreal. So we've been singing and praying with an entirely different congregation, you know, far across the border, which has been a lot of fun for us and has certainly exposed both congregations to people who would have never seen us before. And sometimes in that context and in the context of Sunday morning, as Lori was saying earlier, there are visitors who sort of pop in and they've jumped into the conversations. And I've ended up having some pretty significant pastoral care conversations with folks, some who are in our community who maybe just have never been to the parish before, but also some who are very far away. You know, we're starting to have conversations about the fact that our congregation is much more broad now than it was ever before, that it's not just Wilton and the surrounding communities, that actually we have people who are joining us consistently for worship who are in Kentucky and Louisiana and California. And it's, you know, it's an interesting sort of thing to try to bridge and imagine what that might be. But I think there are tons of opportunities for collaboration and for evangelism.
And I've even heard of practices that I thought were great, where a church would say, all right, well, we're going to give our staff kind of a break, and we're not going to produce a digital service this weekend, but all of us are going to go to the National Cathedral, or we're all going to go to a service at Lori's church, or whoever, you know, or like Marissa's saying, a church that we have a partnership with. So we're still going as us, and maybe somebody sets up a Facebook premiere, like a watch party that says, we're going to all watch this together. So we're still commenting, you know, hey, their stained glass windows are nicer than ours, or whatever, you know, whatever people talk about in the pews. But you have this opportunity. And, you know, I think that's one thing that I've really enjoyed. Again, I work with churches across the country, most of whom I've never visited. So to be able to pop into churches that I've never visited, that I've worked with, has really been a gift and a blessing. And again, helped me see myself as part of the larger body of Christ. And I think the more that we work together to encourage and facilitate that, I think there's an opportunity there. I think that is tremendous. I don't know, more thoughts on that, or anywhere else you want to go?
Well, I think if I may jump in, what I have found really interesting is I have quite a few friends who are not churched. And so they have suddenly discovered, you know, that the church is coming to them. And I think that there's a great opportunity in recognizing that, yes, our buildings are wonderful and beautiful and awesome in some ways. And there's something about having a presence outside of that building for people who I think are very spiritually hungry. What I found when I was in parish ministry is that, you know, to get somebody to walk through the door of the church is a miracle unto itself. The reputation for the church outside the door is not exactly the best reputation. And so, you know, being able to see, I mean, I read one comment of this lady who saw worship, you know, of a community together online, and she contacted the priest of the parish to say, hey, I've never walked into an Episcopal church. I love what you all are doing. I love what you're saying. When this is back, I would love to be baptized. Now, if we had been in our buildings, I suspect that she would have never walked in and never experienced an Episcopal church. So, I mean, I think we're just by simply being there, we're beginning to practice some of that evangelism. It's taking it to the next step and saying, how do we engage with folks who are commenting? Because it's great to have a comment. If we're not going to engage with them, we've missed an opportunity.
Well, and somebody in the chat said that are most people leaving the chat on during service? Which I know our church is, which is, again, why we're having, we're piecing each other. Or the number of people who have said to Karen, the donut lady, everybody misses the donut table at coffee hour and sharing that. And just kind of, again, we talked about this just as we were getting on, those little relational comments that you make to people that you sit next to every Sunday, for forever. So I think that chat is so much a part of it. So rather than looking at it as a distraction from the main service, looking at it as being part of it and enriching, again, what makes us the community that we are. Lori, we haven't heard from you in a while. Any thoughts on all this?
We've just, with going online now, we've been able to reconnect with a lot of parishioners who've not been able to come to church because they've been homebound, and parishioners who have moved away. And it's just been really heartwarming to be that church family again. And so that's been really, really nice. And sometimes we go through the comments and say, oh, do you know this person? And then some of our clergy will say, oh yeah, that's, from another parish where I served, or, oh, that's my mom, or that's my sister on the East Coast. So there's definitely an opportunity, Facebook puts on there, who would you like to share this, video with this stream? And so there's definitely that opportunity to share that. And we're just starting the conversations about how we intentionally and thoughtfully invite others to worship with us. So
I think, Lisa, we have an opportunity to do that all weekend long too, right? All week. Jeremy made the point earlier that the church is not just worship on Sunday morning. And so what we've tried to do is create landing pads almost every day. And when I say we there, I don't mean just me. I mean the staff team as well as our lay leaders. And so some of that is just coffee hour, right? And some of it is other moments for worship. And some of it is, youth group. But there's something every day. And there are specific lay leaders who signed up to be hosts and greeters at all of those things. So it's not just me sort of saying, hi, how are you, right? It's a chance for people to land all week long and to have those relational moments.
Sorry, I lost my cursor there for a minute. Somebody had asked, saying, kind of like they don't even know where to start. If you're listening to all this and you're like, wow, that is so far above, these experiences are so far above our heads, like we don't even know where to go. Episcopal Communicators is a wonderful resource. I certainly encourage you to start there, get on the Facebook group and throw it out there, because everybody is going through this. I would also reach out to your diocesan communicator. I think one of the gifts of the church are the cohort networks that we form and the relationships that I have had through Forma, through SEEP, through Episcopal communicators. And, we all have our cohort groups. Find that. If there are other, there's other churches in your diocese, really reach out to them. I mean, this is the time as communicators to be communicating with one another in terms of what is working, what might we do together. So I think that's really important. I'm also trying to keep up of, wow, the comments are coming. Somebody had asked if anybody is doing a service specifically for children. And I know there's been questions that I've dealt with dealing with virtual VBS. So I'm going to go on the record and say, I think, kids are getting a lot of screen time. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to consider non-digital ways to reach out to our families that doesn't put any more pressure. And I'm sure Deon can speak to this as well as anybody, how much screen time kids are dealing with right now. So I figured, like with VBS, well, you're not spending that budget on your snacks and your crafts. So maybe you spend that budget you had set aside on mailings that you're going to send home to your kids. Or this is where Marissa, was it your church that did the Easter parade where everybody decorated their car for Easter? And like, I cried, and I'm not even part of their church. You know, you could tell people were so joyful and happy to see each other. So I think that's really,
we were very socially distant. We followed all the rules. We stayed far apart. People stayed in their cars, or they stood up on their, you know, in their sunroofs, and cars drove through and they decorated and we waved. And then we drove around town and went to see some of our shut-ins. But we were perfectly socially distant and very appropriate, and people needed to be together. And that was the only way for us to do it. And it was magic.
No, I mean, when I was still in a parish, we had switched to Sunday school in a box, or Sunday school to go. I could see us, you know, spending some money doing VBS in a box, where you drop the box off. It has all the stuff that you need. The dollar store is your friend, to create VBS. I mean, I honestly think that what this pandemic is doing for us is opening up that creative, how can we do things in a new way side of the church that for too long may have been neglected. Because some of the creativity that's coming out is absolutely amazing.
I would add to, I just, to add to that in a box idea, our parish is thinking about doing exactly the same thing, because one of my colleagues has a son who graduated college in the midst of this just a week or so ago, and their college sent a graduation in a box home to them that included a little confetti for them to throw. So just some fun stuff. And I think there are definitely ways for us to do something like that and mix a bit of digital with a bit of hands-on, not being on the screen as well.
Yeah. Somebody asked a question about changing your existing website content, and that's a great question. You know, if you read through most of our websites, and they talk about all of our fellowship ministries and our outreach ministries and our different, a lot of that ain't happening right now. And we know it. And we don't know, or if it is, it's happening in a very different way. And there's a lot of question on whether it's going to happen like it was before. So yes, in the vast amount of spare time that I'm sure you all have, overhauling your website content is not a bad idea. And some of that, I think we really want to think about directing people towards our online offerings. And just because we're doing it online doesn't mean we're not serving others. Just because we're not gathering in person doesn't mean we're not doing formation. This is a great time to promote faith at home practices or whatever. So yeah, I think your website probably could stand a good look over. But I think communicating the basic message on who we are, and as others have mentioned, the barrier to entry right now is so low. I am like the churchiest church lady ever, and it's hard for me to get myself to church on a Sunday. So to have people easily engaging with you, you know, really attune those websites to answer the questions that they might have. I'm reading comments. So I'm going to ask my panelists, as we're kind of drifting towards a close here, what is giving you hope right now, and what do you think you'll want to keep on doing? You know, even if we could all go back tomorrow and gather fully in our buildings, what would you want to keep on doing?
For us, it's definitely the online worship. We know that we're doing that, and I'm so glad that you know, we have this opportunity to not invent it, but to create another experience, right? And then in this new season, we've had to prioritize communications and activities and events, and it's become, you know, like a season of natural pruning. And so sometimes it's hard to stop things that have gone on for years and years, and then you find yourself, is this redundant or is this necessary? And then it will give us space to grow and do new things and to be creative with this new energy and in this new model and this new way of worship and ministry in the different areas. So that's really exciting.
I did see a shout out. Somebody mentioned using existing resources, particularly like the presiding bishops, habits of grace. And I know that there's a lot of great content around the way of love. There's great content around baptism. I know the Episcopal Church, Jeremy Tackett is part of this, is chugging out a lot of great video content. Use it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes it's a little hard to find, but it's out there, and it's really good stuff. So keep going, keep going. What's giving you hope? What would we keep doing?
I would add to that, it doesn't have to be long either. Something as short as a 2-minute video that people can begin or end their day. You don't have to do all morning prayer or evening prayer. I mean, those are wonderful. I'm glad that we have communities, but something short sometimes is the best. I mean, I started doing just a prayer in the morning and a prayer in the evening on Facebook. And I just did it for a week thinking, oh, well, this is something that I would offer. And now it's like there's a following of folks who wait for those for the morning and for the evening. And so that's been surprising to me. But what's giving me hope is the creativity that we are I mean, if you had said to this church 4 months ago, that all the clergy would suddenly be televangelists and that we'd be worshiping on church, you would probably have us committed. But yet we figured out how to do some amazing and wonderful and life-giving and Christ-centered things in a short period of time, which says to me that we have all the creativity for this church to thrive sitting right there. We just have to use it. And so for me, that's the hope. That's the excited part. The church is, I mean, we're going to have to grieve some of the things that we're going to let go of. But I think that we also get to celebrate the ways that God is recreating and reshaping this church and reshaping these people.
Love that. Love that. Anybody else want to chime in on that? What's giving you hope right now?
I would add on to especially what Deon said there. It has been amazing to watch the number of folks who have embraced and said, we're going to try this, we're going to do it, small groups and big. And part of what's really giving me life in this work, and I'm gonna put my contact information here in the chat, so be sure to grab this if you want it. Part of what I get to do, and part of what our office has been tasked with from Bishop Curry, is walking alongside individuals and parishes that are doing this work, and we love to get to do it. Small churches, big, it doesn't have to be a massive project, but if you've got a question about how live stream works, some of these questions that have come in about how do we get started with this, how do we do it with no budget, how do we do it with taking it from pretty professional to very professional, we handle and talk about all those. A lot of times on Sunday morning on the Episcopal Communicators Facebook page that Lisa's talked about, I'll jump on at 8 a.m. and say, okay, for the next 4 hours, whatever your live streaming questions are in real time, ask them. And we troubleshoot iPhone settings and troubleshoot Facebook Live, which is a constant full-time job. But those are the kinds of things that are out there. And so you don't have to do this alone. And thank you all for being here today. And please reach out and let's keep talking about it.
Lisa, I would say that the same thing that's giving me hope is the thing that I love about this work, and that is God's people and the way that they show up and love each other, the way that they continue to love the world around them, the ways in which, we're all trying to embrace what this is and to walk with each other through it and to be faithful in it. And, there's been so much life and so many new partnerships with the world around us. And I'm grateful for all of that. I think that's very hopeful.
Yeah. I think there's so much hope. So I would again thank everybody who has participated. Reach out to, as I said, any of us here, and we'll help you in any way we can or steer you towards people who can help you. I would call your attention to Sarah Stonecipher-Boland, who is the e-formation person for the Virginia Theological Seminary. She has digital office hours and she has guests all the time, and it's just fun. She does those on Facebook, so look her up. Jeremy's obviously a great contact. So reach out. There are people doing this who are enthusiastic about it and would love to help you. Hang in there, everybody. You are doing a great job of building the kingdom of God in the world. Keep up the good work, and peace and love, and thanks all for being here. So thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you all. Sorry to be late.
I'm late to church all the time.